Hi everyone, this is Mike with episode 60 of Getting Everyone Moving, brought to you by Palms and Pines Parasports. Today we have Dave Elbert. Hey Dave,
Hey, Mike. Good to see you.
good to see you. So tell us, how did you get involved in the field of wheelchair basketball and any other adaptive sports?
Sure. I guess like a lot of people you've already interviewed, I have a child, my oldest child, my daughter, was paralyzed when she was 4 months old. She had cancer, crushed her spinal cord, and we got involved because we had the good fortune to live in Baltimore, and some people said, "Oh, you should check out the Bennett Blazers. We have this adaptive sports thing in town." And it took us a little while. We were dealing with other, sort of medical things, and like most people, I had no idea what was going on. But then I went down and met Jerry and Gwenna Herman, who are the coaches who created the program, directed. And at 16 months, started taking Ruby in, and they have a whole progression. It's interesting, the title of your podcast, because for the really little kids, they're not playing sports. They're just it's sort of age appropriate stuff. They're moving around, they're doing obstacle courses and pushing balls around and swinging a bat at a tethered ball, little kids stuff, and just having fun. And then it sort of progresses up to things that look a little more like the way I remember gym class in first grade or so. You kind of go through the stages of things. So, and then there are more Paralympic type sports as they get older.
So what, so you started your daughter at, you said 18 months? Sorry, 16.
Yeah, I think 16 months. I think Ruby was 16 months.
So what was she doing? And so she's played throughout her entire life then, a variety of adaptive sports?
Yeah. I mean, that's really, yeah, obviously you don't have memories back to when you're 16 months old. So sports have been a part of her life and her identity. And she's now 20 and a sophomore at the University of Illinois and on the wheelchair basketball team there. So, but Bennett is a program that really emphasizes and believes in lots of sports. You'd have to ask Jerry and Gwenna. I think it's partially that's their philosophy, that's a good and healthy thing to do. Partially, they don't want to get bored doing the same thing all the time. I'm sure there's some element of that. But also, I think it's, almost anything that any kid has ever shown interest in, they were kind of like, oh, cool, let's try that, and they've been doing it a long time, 30 years or something. So sports come and go for them as well, depending on the kid's interest. But so Ruby got exposed to swimming and track and field, wheelchair basketball, archery, sled hockey, wheelchair lacrosse, wheelchair tennis. I don't know. I'm probably forgetting a few things, and and also a lot of less formal and structured thing. And some of those sports they play at a a competitive level where they have games during the year and go to nationals and things, and others they don't. Wheelchair lacrosse is still a relatively new sport here in Maryland. Of course, is a very big hotbed for lacrosse. And so they do that as one of the sports they do during the day on Saturday, and the kids play games amongst themselves, like scrimmage type things. But they've never, as far as I know, had a competitive game against anyone. Although some of their older athletes, who it's a juniors program, and they age out basically at college age at 18. But then they've done a little bit, like they have an adult group that will still do sled hockey together, and several of their former athletes were on the Maryland wheelchair lacrosse team that won the national championship. I want to say last year, but with COVID, I've lost track of what last year means. The last time they had a national championship, whenever that was, 2019 probably, or something like that. And they've been, it's a program that you've interviewed other athletes who've come out of it, or athletes who've come out of it, and other people. And it's one of those older programs in the country. So they've been a part of a lot of different kinds of things. And that was just our luck as a family to be at a place where there is a program. And you certainly know that we have lots of programs in this country, but we have lots of country where there are no programs, or where kids go, 8 hours on the weekend. And even in a place like Baltimore, where we have a great program and an established program, it's pretty much a weekend program, because it draws kids from all over the state and even parts of Pennsylvania and Virginia sometimes. And you can't get here after school and things like that. So it just becomes the family lifestyle for the kids who are really into it. they end up at some age in life where you drop them off on Saturday morning because whatever, swimming starts at 8:30 or 9 or something like that. And then they go all day and they'll do 3 sports during the day, have lunch there with their friends. And then they end up at the ice rink for sled hockey at night, depending on the season, you know.
Yeah.
So it's your kids sleep really well after a day of sports. There's no,
Probably so do their parents, right?
yeah. Well, and it's interesting, you know, when your kids are very small,
Yeah.
I of course, the parents tend to stay during the day. They stay with their kids, and their kids may not be fully self-sufficient in activities of daily living and things like that. And then you tend to move to an age where you're not there. And I was one of many parents who, while you're sitting there, you get involved, right? Kids are throwing up basketballs, you start rebounding and throwing the basketballs back. And, you know, I think Gwenna pegged me early on. The first wheelchair she sent Ruby home with, like the cant that was different on the 2 sides, are all things wrong with it. So I took it apart and I got some parts and I fixed it up and I brought it back the next week. And I kind of joke with Gwenna that she got this gleam in her eye and she was like, oh, well, maybe Ruby should try this chair. And she sent me home with another chair that was not in great shape. Pretty soon you're fixing chairs, you're doing whatever. And then I ratcheted up and really started coaching with the prep team. And so I've coached for a lot of years with prep, and then with varsity, got a little bit smarter by taking the coaching clinic at the University of Illinois in the summer. And I coach out there and help out with their summer camps and things like that. So, and then I, you know, got involved. Chris Rathje was president of the junior division, and they had someone resign from the executive board, and I got asked if I would fill in, and I was thrilled to do that, and then have stayed on doing that for a little bit of that with the NWBA. So
I want to talk more about that, but I want to talk a little bit more about Ruby and your family. So obviously, you know, a difficult thing, right, to see your child paralyzed. What kind of hurdles or challenges did, you know, Ruby and your family face?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting thing. And one of the greatest things I think actually about adaptive sports from the parents' perspective is you get to be around other parents of kids with, you know, various types of disabilities. And so when they're very young, you haven't really thought yet too much about their privacy. So you stand on the sideline and you talk about, you know, who are you seeing for this condition or something like that, and you get feedback, and and there is we found this also because we were also in the oncology world, in the cancer world, because Ruby had cancer, and then it recurred. She relapsed when she was 3 years old, and it was very extensive at that point. So she ended up in a rather intensive treatment program at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. So we were there. Her treatment took over a year and a half, like 450 days or something. So there you also, there's just a comfort when you're in a room with people who are sort of, they're not going through the same thing, but they are going through something rather intense, you know? And so that really helps you find a direction. And I would say that in my experience, there's a great diversity in how programs are run, because they're run by different people and the philosophies they have about it. And so it's a little hit or miss of who introduces you to that world. It's a little hit or miss of who the other families are at that point in time. Yeah. But, you know, Bennett has this feeling that, you know, it's really towards independence for the kids. And I remember very early on, Ruby was she couldn't crawl, but she would drag herself crawl, you know, and she was trying to get somewhere. And she was heavily braced at that point in time. And I had learned from physical therapists about how the braces are supposed to go. And so the braces had slipped. And so I moved to fix the braces. And Jerry Herman just put his hand in my chest and he said, yeah, she doesn't need to be braced right. She just needs to go as fast as she can go right now. And so it really set a different kind of expectation for me. I was like, yeah, he's right. Right now, she's just a kid, a 2-year-old kid or less than 2, you know, whatever it is. And it helped me realize, you know, we kind of got it, but like independence is a really big thing. And I didn't know anyone who had a visible disability other than you and I both wear glasses, which we adapt to pretty well. And I realized that I was in third grade. There was a boy who was in a wheelchair for a few weeks because he broke his leg skiing. And that's the last time I had spent any meaningful time with anyone who was in a wheelchair. So early on, we got sort of taken in by the Spina Bifida Association of Maryland, even though Ruby didn't have spina bifida. She had a spinal cord injury at a young age. Yeah. So lots of similar issues. And, there were monthly meetings and a Christmas party. And it was just fascinating for me to be around now a whole spectrum from little kids up through adults and start to come up with an image of, oh yeah, we have to think a little differently. And so there was a big adaptation, but there was a big push towards independence, towards just letting her fall over, and not help her do things. She's never had a wheelchair with push handles on it. Some people need them and some don't. And we had the experience getting off an airplane a couple of years ago. We were coming back from, I think it was sled hockey nationals in San Jose. And we get out, and the jetway was a pretty steep jetway. And we stand outside the plane, waiting and waiting and waiting for the chair to come up. And the chair finally comes up, and we're tired. She's played hockey for 3 days. We've had 2 flights. We're back. She gets in her chair and she starts pushing up the jetway. Well, she's not going super fast up that jet. She pushes and then comes to a full stop and pushes, and she's going up a steep hill. And I just walk the way I do next to her, like walk, stop, walk, stop. Woman gets out of the plane and she just puts her hands in Ruby's back and starts pushing her up the jetway. Well-meaning person trying to be helpful has never been introduced to the concept that, the chair is part of a person's body. You don't do that. And, Ruby was startled, and I just said, excuse me, you wouldn't do that. And I might have been more curt than I would prefer to be because I was tired. But the woman kind of went off, and she starts exclaiming to everyone, I was just trying to help. And it was interesting because it reminded me of a number of times through our lives where people look at me sort of like this cold, heartless, guy for not stepping in and doing things for my daughter and helping my daughter. And, but I don't know, it's sort of, that's the way it goes, I think, for many of us. And then you just become very aware of a different view of identity, I think. I think one of the things that's the sports program has been really important for in our lives is this idea, like Ruby identifies very much as a person with a disability. It's not like, she doesn't like it when she doesn't have accessibility to something. There are barriers and things, but it's not like it's a problem. It's part of her identity. She happened to go to a school that had a middle school curriculum that talked a lot about identity and had writing assignments about identity. And Ruby picked up the mantle of being the only person in the school with a disability and educating people at that point. And every independent project she did, every presentation at assembly that she did just about was, had something to do with identity and her identity as a person with a disability. So, so I don't know, I guess the original question you asked is sort of what was it like? It's not to say that it wasn't difficult, especially the first week, the first week, you have a child, it's my first child. Yeah. She's born. I actually delivered Ruby with my wife, and we're kind of like hippies like that, I guess. And so the pediatrician comes and looks at her. Oh, she's perfect and everything. Turns out she wasn't perfect. She probably had cancer in utero retrospectively. And at 4 months, it showed itself. And she's paralyzed. And the next thing you know, you think you're going to Thanksgiving at your brother's house. And instead, you're in a hospital where no one else is around except a team that's come in to do emergency laminectomy and surgery on your kid. And you find out she has cancer. So somebody likened it to you got on a plane to go to Iceland and you got off and you're in Italy. It just makes no sense. You can't you kind of can't figure it out. So there was some of that. And there was a lot of concern and worry about the cancer, which is she had a very aggressive cancer. And when she relapsed, it was a very difficult situation. But it's really been, I don't know. I love being a dad. So it's been pretty lovely, actually, all in all. So I don't know.
And is Ruby cancer free now?
Yeah, it's an interesting, they never say in her type of cancer, neuroblastoma, they don't say remission and they don't say cured and things like that. They go 5 years with the term is no evidence of disease, NED. And she has been, we've stopped scanning her years ago. She used to be scanned every 2 weeks and then every month, and so on and so forth. And she has a survivorship clinic. So there's there's a lot of blood tests and things like that, but she's at higher risk for other cancers, but she's been considered cancer-free now for, I don't know, 14 years or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's at University of Illinois, which is, one of the best schools for wheelchair basketball, of course, in the country. What does Ruby, so she's on the team, what does she want to go on and do? Have you had discussions with her about that? Has she talked to you about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, we're family. We talk about that. We're a kind of an academic family because the type of work that my wife and I both do. And so we're not super vocationally oriented, like even in picking majors and things like that. Yeah. So Ruby always struggled when she was looking at colleges and people would say, well, what might you major in? And I finally said, just make up an answer, because people ask a question, people don't know. People say what they're going to major in. And if you actually look at the data,
yeah,
there's like a 30% correlation between what they say they're going to major in and what they actually major in. But she was interested in everything. And so she's still declaring a major. She's working on a couple of things, Spanish. She's creating a disability studies major. She has a couple ideas for minors. She's always been really interested in math and has taken some higher level math. So I don't really know what she's going to do or where she's going to go. She's had some really interesting summer jobs working on disability rights with a legal organization here in Maryland. So I don't know. She's moving off campus next year, and the whole world could change then. So,
yeah. But you and your wife, your family, you've been very supportive of her, and she's very independent, it sounds.
Yeah, Ruby's very independent.
Which I think is where you want to get to, or where you want to see your kids, as a parent.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true whether you have disabilities or not. I think I have to say, I probably wouldn't have thought of it explicitly if my kid didn't have a disability. You just sort of assume it's going to happen, that they're not going to live in the basement their whole life or something like that. But I think I realized that I had to take a little more active role in helping society make that happen. We found it even in school. She, when she got out of treatment and came home the second time, we had already missed signing up for kindergarten and various things like that, that as new parents with both parents working, like we just hadn't tracked on that. And our son was born when Ruby relapsed. Actually, my wife was pregnant. The oncologist had declared that Ruby was done with her cancer. And then Ruby woke up in pain one morning and she wasn't. So Ruby went into surgery. She was diagnosed again on a Tuesday. Friday, she went into surgery in Philadelphia. My wife, I stayed in the hospital with her. My wife drove home to Baltimore. She was 2 weeks away from her due date. And so Saturday night, she went to the midwife and induced labor, had the baby at like 6 a.m. Sunday while Ruby and I listened on the cell phone. And then on Monday, Sarah, my wife, came back up to Philadelphia, moved into the Ronald McDonald House, and Ruby got to be the first person to see her baby brother and name him. So it's been a big family affair. My son spent more of his first half of his first year of life in the Ronald McDonald House in the hospital than at home. But so yeah, there's been sort of a whole move towards really everybody being involved in that kind of independence and figuring out where everybody goes.
So I've and others always, encourage siblings to participate. Has your son participated along with Ruby as well?
Yeah.
In various sports?
Yeah, Ethan, so he used to, show up and come to everything. And he's a little guy and you're in a gym and there are basketballs around. You're just happy, right? He's running around doing stuff. He did ask me when he was about 5 when he could start playing wheelchair basketball. And I said, well, hopefully never. Like, we're just kind of keep that off the table for now. But we've also done wheelchair softball, which is more of an emerging sport in the U.S. at the junior level, or was a few years ago. It's been growing, and so they allowed able-bodied siblings under, I think, 13 to play for a few years, and so Ethan joined in, and it was actually really fun to have them both be on a team together. And because I was so involved with basketball, I've tried to pull back in other sports. Like, I don't think I ever went on the ice in hockey. I just sat in the stands and let her do hockey with no dad intervention or coaching. And then softball, I would help out a lot at practice and stuff like that. But for nationals, mostly my wife would take them to nationals. And so it was a lot of fun, and it was good for him. And certainly he's grown up with a very normalized, what I consider a normalized view of disability, which is nice.
Yeah. So let's shift a bit to your work on the NWBA executive committee. Can you talk a bit about where's the sport heading in the future? I mean, now, obviously with COVID, dissipating, I mean, where are we now and where are we heading?
Yeah, so we're now, like a lot of activities in general, returning to play, hoping that we're right about what's safe, trying to get people going again. It's definitely been a difficult time. It was a really difficult time last year for nationals when juniors got canceled. It got canceled late. People were already on their way to nationals. It was really, really difficult. But we're not a huge organization. We're run by some really good people who really care about what's going on. But there's an awful lot of volunteer effort as well. And coming back, it's been, the board has worked really hard, and I'm on the junior executive committee. We kind of loosely call it the junior board, but we're not part of the board of directors. Yeah. We're elected by juniors. And historically, the junior division existed separately and then merged into the NWBA. So there's a lot of history of independence of the junior division that's sometimes is still something we're all working out. But the leadership of the NWBA, I shouldn't speak for them, but in my discussions, they would very much like the junior division to still run the junior division as much as they can in terms of what they think are the right ways to do things. But we can't do it without them either. So right now we have more teams coming back and playing. Just even in the last few weeks, more teams have added in. We're working towards having nationals. One thing we decided early on is we just have to be as flexible as possible, which is historically been kind of difficult for any organization. And the NWBA is not different than that. Once you sign a contract that you're going to use facilities for nationals on certain dates, it's very hard to move that stuff. But luckily, we're going to be in Wichita, and the people in Wichita after last year realized, it's hard for everybody. So everybody's trying as hard as they can, I think, to be flexible. And so we pushed the nationals dates back into June with the hope that some teams could get going. We normally have some relatively simple rules, like to qualify for nationals, a team has to play a minimum of 10 sanctioned games during the year with, real NWBA officials and things like that. And we cut that to 5 at the beginning of the year. And now we've agreed as an executive board that we can even be flexible with that. If a team can just get going and really wants to come to nationals, if we have space for them, we're not going to worry about that. Yeah. We're going to have the flip side nightmare, which is we rank teams. And a few years ago, actually, I kicked off this idea of having a ranking committee where we're more transparent about how we try to rank teams, and we have representation from each of our conferences. But now we're going to have teams that don't have records, right? What you really try to do when you rank is on performance. So you say team A beat team B, then team A ranks above team B. It's never that simple because lots of teams, they're not professionals. They have ups and downs. They have a kid who's taking the SATs one day who's a really important player who's not there. So you never know what you're going to get. But we've done pretty well. And I think the best we can do is tell people why, to have real reasons why we've done what we do. Because people are reasonable and they might not agree with you, but at least they don't feel like there's somebody in some back room making stuff up about their teams or something terrible. So we do the best and we try to learn, we listen to them too. This year, it's going to be extremely difficult. We have teams that will not be starting up. We've allowed players to transfer to other teams, and then they'll go back next year. And it's going to be really hard to figure out what to do with people. I think that we're hoping to have a meeting with the division and ask, tell people what's going on and tell people that we're going to do the best we can, especially for the second tournament. So we have 16 teams ranked into the varsity national tournament. And then the next 16 teams go into this junior national invitational. We sort of modeled the name on the NIT tournament in NCAA. And that's not a national championship, but it's at the national championships. And it feels great to win that tournament as well. But we may or may not have enough teams to fill that. We may not have 16 teams. And if we don't, what we really want to do is bring teams that want to come and can come, guarantee them 4 games somehow, right? Because you're going to put the money into getting there. Normally you'd get 4 games, and try to do it as fairly as possible. So I've started talking to a variety of people who organize tournaments, get some ideas. Is it going to be some kind of pool play? Are we going to put together other teams? How will we do it? We're working on it. The NWBA is pretty sure that they have enough court space that we can figure out how to do it. A lot of people don't know, but behind the scenes, right? How do you know what time your team is going to play and how that bracket works? It takes a long time to put that spreadsheet together to get the flow. Now with COVID, we spent weeks last year figuring out where chairs were going to be stored so we could safely store chairs in a facility and keep things distance and stuff. I helped with that committee, and it was literally weeks. And, we ended up with storage trailers out, and then we didn't use any of it because the thing fell apart at the last minute.
Right.
It's a lot that goes into it.
Well, so the second part of the question, I'd like you to answer this with thinking about, collegiate kids, youth being able to move up to collegiate play. Where's the sport going, and how do we get more collegiate programs? Because, okay, it's growing a bit, but there's still a handful of schools only in the country.
Yeah. That's a complex question, obviously, and I know you've asked others. And where the sport's going is, I think we always have 2 sides to that coin. One is it takes all the running we can do to stay in place. It's Alice in Wonderland, right? Like, I'm running as fast as I can just to stay in place, or whatever the quote is, because it takes a lot of work, and people come and go, and volunteers come and go, and we don't have a huge budget to sort of magically make things happen. So we work really hard to not slide backwards, and we all want to move forwards. And I think that the goal for almost everyone involved is always the same: to try to make sure that the opportunities are available to anyone that they might benefit who would like to take advantage of those opportunities, right? So we want to make sure we have equipment available and programs available and healthy programs available. We have programs that are run by hospitals. We have programs that are run by parks and recs. We have programs that are run by, to use an old term, mom and pops, right? Like just a couple parents to run things. And how do we make sure that those always keep going? So we need to be very versatile. We also work in a field, disability itself is incredibly diverse, as anyone listening to this podcast would know. So there's not some simple magic way to serve the needs of all the populations, and basketball will never serve the needs of the entire population, right? Wheelchair basketball is not set up as a sport for blind athletes, for instance, right? So we need a multitude of sports as well. But I think where we want to go, I think you're exactly right. The juniors feel this need to expand the intercollegiate game. Certainly the intercollegiate division feels that. We did start a committee this year. We talked a bit about this, and we started a committee that I sit on that bridges the junior and the intercollegiate game. So Jim Glatch runs it from Edinburgh University, and Ford from Alabama is on it, and Doug Garner from Texas is on it, and a few of us from the junior division, Diane Winterstein and myself and a couple others, and Kate Rougeau, who used to be an assistant coach at Illinois and now is off with a teaching career at Oakland University, is on it. And so we have sort of tried to bring together what are the needs of the 2 divisions and help that out. The college division sometimes forgets this is what parents are thinking, right? Like everybody goes to a website, we'd like to see these things. And so we're knocking off some of that stuff. So we have consistent information and contact. We would love it if summer camps were coordinated in some way, so kids could get to multiple summer camps. I think we need a lot more transparency in our sport. People talk a lot about scholarships and things, and they don't. People get the idea that that's like, I was a 5-star recruit at, Duke or Kansas or someplace like that. It's really different in our sport. And we have other ways that also help athletes go to college, like SSI and vocational rehab and things like that, that parents need to be educated about. One thing we lack in juniors is a full classification. Just a few years ago, we added the junior classification. So it's not unusual that you have a parent of a student who might be, or an athlete who might be class 1 and is super fast, but they see that kid competing with athletes who are like 3 5s and 4s at juniors, and they say, my kid's never going anywhere. And you're like, oh, no, your kid has all this opportunity. But it's very difficult for parents of an 8-year-old who don't know anything about wheelchair basketball to internalize that. Yeah. We have now the opportunity to watch games that are streamed, so people are getting educated. Yeah. But in terms of actually opening up those programs, I feel a really strong need to diversify the type of college and university that has these programs, right? Because we need to meet the athletes' academic goals as well and life goals. Some people want to go far from home, some people don't. Some people want to go to a big university, some would like to go to a small university. Ryan Martin has, just started off this program in New York that's really interesting to me because City University in New York, he's got a bunch of different colleges. So you can be in different colleges and you can pull them together. Historically, in the college game, my understanding is that you could be at a community college near a big university and still play with the university if you weren't ready for university. I don't know why that's not there anymore, other than you can't coordinate things. Maybe I often say, let's figure out what the problem exactly is and solve it. But I also think that a lot of people focus on the fact that we need to educate the community, right? I mean, the people beyond the community of people with disabilities don't know much about us, and that continues to be an issue. Certainly, higher visibility of Paralympic programming on TV will help with that. But deep inside, until people live with people with disabilities in their lives, it's very difficult for them to understand how this is supposed to go. And so there are huge disability rights issues that I think need to be handled to drive that ahead. And I think that takes champions at different universities who are really going to make that happen. I know a couple of former athletes from Illinois that I met when I would be out there in the summer. One goes on to be a graduate student at Purdue, and next thing you know, there's some action happening at Purdue. But if you had 2 or 3 of those people who are faculty members there, then maybe you hire some, maybe you can make something go. But we're going to need financial input. We're going to need education. I actually think we need a lot more education within the disability community. Myself, we focused a lot on that bridge to the so-called able-bodied community. But we are a diverse community, and I think people within the community see things very differently, see people with different disabilities very differently. I think we have lost in sort of civil and social rights movements in this country. We've lost a lot of the sense of intersectionality that we used to have. If you go back and you watch Crip Camp or some of Judy Heumann's great podcasts, and you see how civil rights were civil rights, right? So you have people with multiple communities who can work together and support each other. And I don't know, it gets too philosophical maybe to say in this country we've sort of divided our communities a lot, in my opinion, and I think that hurts us. So I think we could work together on that. And the intercollegiate division, there are certainly dedicated, smart people there who've been doing this a really long time, who are far more qualified to answer this or speak to this. But I know they're working very hard on getting some foot farther out of the recreational part of what's going on at universities and more deeply embedded in the what we think of as traditional sport, which is NCAA sport or something like that. So there are a lot of issues, but mostly I think we just have to be bulldogs about it. You just have to keep banging on doors. Yeah. You educate, you need organized foci, but I think it takes people who just are dogged about pursuing it and
Yeah.
work together, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wonderful response. So we're getting towards the end of our podcast time here. What are some final words that you'd like to leave, people with?
Oh, I don't know. I think a lot about sport. I used to think about Paralympic versus sort of Special Olympic sports for people with disabilities, and sometimes we have rifts, and there I think people really do need to educate themselves and within our community and help more broadly. I think a lot about the value of sport. We read and we see a lot about justification for providing these opportunities for people with disability, and I would love people to have more conversations about that. I think that there are things that are true, but have become almost cliche, like team building, what we learn through doing sport, right? Team building and things like that. I think actually, to me, sports for people with disabilities, they're like the essence of sport in some way, right? Like the most exciting thing when you watch sports, whether you're watching the Celtics play the Lakers or whatever, is there is always somebody who has some more transcendent athleticism. It's what you do with what you don't have, right? It's that ability in the moment to respond in sport and find a way to accomplish what you want to do. And nothing exemplifies that more purely than our athletes, because if you're a class 2 player and you need to stop a 4-5 coming down the floor, and we see that all the time, right? They find ways to impact the game. It's really a beautiful thing. And there is always somebody bigger, stronger, faster than you. You need to, and I think the essence of that and what sports gives kids, especially, it stokes this desire to achieve, which is such an important part of human development. And it builds that sort of sense of self-empowerment. And I think it just provides a gateway to life. And I almost don't care so much that it's going to make you be a good team player in a business environment or something, which is what it often sounds like. But what are the most important values in life for most people? Joy, being able to learn new things all through your life, being curious about things. And sport injects that into a community where a lot of kids don't get that, right? If they're sort of shunted to the side with a disability, it's not just that they never got to play softball or they never got to hit a tennis ball. It's that they don't even know that this is normal for me. Like this, if I get excited about this, I should do this. I can do this. And for me, that's just deeply important that kids grow up with that.
Thanks, Dave. Very enjoyable. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you putting all these together. They're really fascinating. It's great to listen to, and all your work.